The storm did not simply arrive, it devoured the sky. Clouds rolled over the prairie in a bruised, boiling mass, swallowing the horizon until the land looked like a lonely island trapped beneath a raging sea. Ezra Cole had been riding in storms his whole life, but tonight the wind felt sharper, louder, angrier, as if the sky had some grudge against the earth. His coat snapped behind him like a torn sail, and every hoofbeat from his horse sounded like it was being swallowed by mud. Ezra was tired. Tired of the loneliness that seemed stitched into his bones. Tired of empty evenings in a ranch house built for a family he never managed to have. But he wasn't the kind of man who ignored trouble, especially not trouble that involved his neighbors, even the ones who hardly spoke more than 2 words to him in a year. Widow Adler was one of those neighbors. A giant of a woman, the town called her, though the word giant never sat right with Ezra. She was tall, yes. Broad-shouldered, yes. Built from years of plowing fields. Alone and lifting feed sacks heavier than most men could manage. But she wasn't frightening. She was simply someone the world had forced to become stronger than she ever planned to be. Life had carved her into something formidable. Most folks in town avoided her ranch, not because she was unfriendly, but because she didn't bend or shrink to make others feel comfortable. Ezra admired people like that, though he'd never said so aloud. He hadn't planned to be anywhere near her property tonight, but just before the storm rolled in, he'd spotted a gap in her fence, big enough for cattle to wander into the ravine. He couldn't ignore it. Losing animals could ruin a woman already, fighting an uphill battle to keep her land running after her husband's death. So here he was, soaked to the skin, boots filled with freezing water, rain slick in his hands as he urged his horse across the flooded prairie. When he reached the fence, the sight confirmed his worry. Boards lay scattered like broken ribs. Wind shoved him sideways as he dismounted, mud clutching at his boots as if the earth itself wanted to pull him down. He knelt, gripping one of the loose boards, trying to judge if he could fix it enough to last the night. Then he heard it. A low, broken sound, half groan, half breath, drifting through the rain. Ezra froze, heart punching against his ribs. He rose slowly, turning toward the barn. The storm made everything shiver and blur. But there it was again, a soft, pained noise swallowed by thunder. It came from the far side of the barn near the shadow of the half-broken shutters. Ezra didn't hesitate. He left the fence behind, shoving his way through the wind, one hand shielding his eyes from the sheets of rain. The closer he got, the more uneasy the air became, like the world itself was holding its breath. When he rounded the corner, lightning split the sky, brief, bright, violent. And in that flash he saw her, Tallulah Adler the giant. Widow lay sprawled in the mud, her body twisted unnaturally, hair matted with rainwater, palms pressed weakly into the earth as if she tried and failed to lift herself. Ezra's stomach plunged. "Widow Adler," he shouted, his voice swallowed by thunder. He dropped to his knees beside her, the mud cold enough to burn. Her face was pale, eerily pale, and the rain washed down her cheeks like tears she hadn't chosen to cry. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She shifted slightly, a deep tremor running through her body. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes clouded with pain and confusion. "Ezra," she whispered, barely shaping the word. "I'm here," he said, brushing wet hair from her forehead to check for injuries. "What happened?" She winced. "Ladder broke. Storm hit too fast. Shutters loose. Needed fixing." Her words came in thin, breathless strands. Ezra followed her gaze toward the barn wall. A shattered ladder lay half buried in mud, one side split clean in two. She must have climbed up to secure the shutters before the worst of the storm. But the wind had taken her down hard. He swallowed, forcing calm into his voice. "Don't move yet. I need to check your leg." Her left leg was twisted under her in a way that made his jaw tighten. Not a clean break, but bad. Dangerous, especially in the freezing rain. He leaned closer, tracing the line of her hip down to her knee, trying to see where the swelling started, how deep the damage went. Every second counted. He had to figure out how to move her without making things worse. But just as he lowered his head to inspect the injury, she stirred again, just barely conscious. Her eyes opened, hazy, unfocused, and she caught the angle of his posture, the way he was kneeling over her, the direction of his gaze. Her voice came out cracked, raw, confused. "What are your eyes? Between my legs?" Ezra jerked upright, startled, rain dripping from his chin. The question wasn't sharp or accusatory. It was the loose, drifting thought of someone barely holding on to consciousness, someone in pain and frightened and lost in the storm's chaos. He steadied his breath, forcing his voice to remain deep and calm. "Because I'm checking where you're hurt," he answered firmly. "Your leg's twisted bad. I need to see how to lift you." Another shudder of thunder rolled across the plains. Tallulah blinked slowly, her gaze slipping in and out of focus. She didn't seem to fully understand, but she didn't pull away either. Ezra saw it then. She was fading fast. "We need to get you inside," he said softly, almost more to himself than to her. He moved beside her, sliding his arms under her shoulders and knees. Careful, so careful not to jar the injured leg. She was heavy with muscle and soaked clothing, but Ezra didn't stop. With a grunt, he lifted her against his chest. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath warm but trembling. The wind fought him the entire way across the yard. Mud tried to suck his boots. Under rain hammered his back like 1,000 tiny fists, but he kept walking, kept carrying her, because no one deserved to die alone in the mud. He shouldered open the cabin door, stumbled inside, and lowered her gently to the wooden floor. The house felt eerily quiet after the howl of the storm. Ezra struck a match with shaking fingers, coaxing a fire to life in the hearth. Only once the flames caught did he kneel beside her again. Her breathing steadied. Her pulse softened. She was alive. She would make it if he stayed, if he kept watch, if he didn't leave her alone through the night. Ezra wiped a strand of wet hair from her face and whispered, more to himself than to her, "You're safe now, Tallulah. I've got you." The storm raged on outside, but inside something had changed, and Ezra felt it settle deep in the quiet space between his ribs. Morning came slow, like the prairie itself didn't want to wake after the long night. The air smelled of damp wood and burnt ash, and the sunlight, weak but golden, crept through the cracks in the shutters Ezra had nailed shut before dawn. Inside Widow Adler's cabin, the world had gone quiet again. Only the soft crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of a woman's breathing filled the room. Ezra sat in a worn wooden chair beside the hearth, elbows resting on his knees, eyes heavy but alert. He hadn't slept at all. His clothes were still damp, and his hands bore faint cuts from lifting her and fixing what he could of the roof once she was safe. Every time he blinked, the storm replayed itself, her falling, the rain, her whisper, that strange and broken question, "Why are your eyes between my legs?" He could still hear her voice, faint, confused, half delirious. He'd told her the truth then, but it still echoed in his mind like a ghost. The prairie had a way of turning rumors into wildfire, and if anyone else had been around, that one moment of misunderstanding could have ruined them both. But she didn't know that, and he hoped she never would. He reached for the kettle hanging over the fire, poured coffee into a tin cup, and took a sip that burned his tongue. The warmth helped keep his thoughts steady. Behind him, Tallulah Adler stirred. Her breath hitched softly as she shifted beneath the quilt. The cot creaked, and then came a groan, low, pained, but alive. Ezra set the cup aside and turned toward her. Her eyes blinked open, searching the room in confusion before landing on him. For a long second, she didn't say a word. Then in a rasping voice that was more strength than sound, she managed, "Ezra? I'm here," he said quietly. What happened? You fell off your ladder last night. The storm threw you down hard. I found you by the barn." She blinked again, memory slowly piecing itself together. The shutters. I thought I could fix them before the wind got worse. She looked down at her leg, now splinted and wrapped with torn linen from one of her curtains. Guess I didn't. Ezra gave a small half-smile. You almost did. Just bad luck, that's all. She reached to touch the bandage, winced, and then let her hand fall. Did you do this? I've patched up worse out on the range, he said. You'll heal. Just need rest. Her eyes softened for the first time. And the fire? The house? You stayed? He nodded once. Couldn't leave you here alone. For a while, silence filled the cabin again. Comfortable, fragile silence, the kind where words felt unnecessary. Ezra busied himself by adding wood to the fire, pretending not to notice how her gaze lingered on him, studying him as if she'd never really looked at him before. Then she spoke again, her tone quieter this time. Ezra, did I say anything strange last night? He froze, hand hovering over the firewood. Strange? I remember. She hesitated, color rising faintly in her cheeks. You were kneeling beside me, and I think I said something foolish. I don't remember what. He cleared his throat. You were half conscious. You said a lot of things that didn't make sense. Her brow furrowed. Did I embarrass myself? He turned slightly toward her, a ghost of amusement tugging at his mouth. You asked me why my eyes were between your legs. Her face went red instantly. Oh, Lord above. She pressed a hand to her forehead, mortified. I did not. You did, Ezra said softly, not unkindly. You were hurt, delirious. Don't worry about it. She groaned. I must have sounded like a fool. He shook his head. You sounded like someone who didn't know if she'd live through the night. That quieted her. She studied him again, his calm, his steady presence, the exhaustion beneath his eyes. You stayed up all night? Didn't want the fire to die? Her lips curved faintly. Not quite a smile, but something close. You've got a good heart, Ezra Cole. You always did. He looked down at his hands, embarrassed by praise he wasn't used to hearing. Just did what anyone decent would have done. No, she said firmly. Not anyone would have. Most men in town cross the road when they see me coming. They say I'm too big, too cold, too much of something they can't name. He met her eyes then, and for the first time she didn't look away. You're not too much. You're just someone who's had to carry more than most. Something inside her softened. And you, Ezra? You've been carrying loneliness so long it's turned into armor. He swallowed hard, caught off guard by how easily she saw him. Maybe. The fire cracked between them and the wind outside began to ease. The storm had passed, leaving only the dripping of melted frost from the roof. After a long pause, Tallulah said, You can't let the town find out you spent the night here. They'll talk. Ezra gave a small, tired laugh. They'll talk anyway. They always do. But this, she started, then stopped herself. There was no way to explain the way people twisted kindness into scandal, especially out here where gossip was its own kind of weather. He stood slowly, walking to the window, brushing aside the curtain. The prairie stretched endless and clean again under the pale sky. If anyone asks, he said, I'll tell them I stayed because you were hurt. Because it was the right thing to do. She watched him in silence, then said softly, And if they ask why your eyes were between my legs? Ezra turned, a half-smile breaking through the tiredness on his face. Then I'll tell them the truth. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. And what truth is that? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because I cared enough to make sure you'd live. The words hung in the air like something too delicate to touch. For a while, neither spoke. The firelight painted both of their faces in warm gold and shadow. Outside, the first birds began to sing, faint but real, a sign that the worst was over. Tallulah sank back into her pillow, the tightness around her mouth easing. I never thought I'd say this, she murmured. But I'm glad you came last night. Ezra nodded. So am I. They stayed there in the quiet for a long while, the distance between them shrinking with every breath. The storm had broken more than a fence, it had broken something, open inside both of them. Later, when the sun finally rose high enough to chase the last chill from the room, someone knocked at the door. Ezra's head turned sharply. That'll be someone from town, he muttered. They'll have seen my horse. Tallulah tensed. Ezra. He raised a hand. Don't worry. He stepped toward the door, pausing just before he opened it. The light caught his face, lined with fatigue but steady. He glanced back at her and said quietly, Let them talk. Truth don't scare me. Then he opened the door to face whoever stood outside. And behind him, the giant widow, Tallulah Adler, watched him with something rare in her eyes. Not fear, not embarrassment, but the beginning of trust and maybe something deeper. Outside, the world had been washed clean. Inside, two hearts, long starved of warmth, had found something like it again.